territory of California was thousands of miles away from New Spain's administrative center, present-day Mexico City, California will be considered New Spain's northern frontier. As the territory of California becomes a part of New Spain, settlement of this area will become very important to the Spanish crown. While there was knowledge of California long before Spanish settlement in 1769, California remained relatively unknown. As stated previously, the Pacific Ocean on the west, the eastern Sierra Mountains, and the southeastern deserts kept California and California Indians isolated. It was a mythical place, understood to be populated with hostile Indians. It was seen as rugged, undesirable, and unprofitable. So why settle California? Why is it so important to settle the territory of California? During the era of European colonization, if Spain left its northern territory unpopulated, it ran the risk of other European powers encroaching on their northern frontier. Ideas for settling. The first idea was to get Spanish loyalists from central New Spain, or today's Mexico City, to populate its northern frontier. But it was very difficult to encourage or convince any Spanish loyalists to pick up their bags and their families to go to its unknown northern territory. Thus, the second idea would be to transform the existing population, meaning transforming California Indians into loyal subjects of the Spanish crown. It will be the Catholic Church that will carry out this transformation. Spain will commission the Catholic Church to settle California. They will end up building a string of missions along the coast of California from San Diego to Sonoma. The missions were supposed to last 10 years, in which California Indians would become quote-unquote Hispanicized and self-govern themselves and become loyal subjects to Spain. In their religious zeal, the Franciscan priests will carry out their mission by the sword and the cross. In other words, through religious indoctrination and, if need be, through the use of violence. The California missions will become the economic core and social structure during the Spanish period. After initial contact with California Indians, Spanish priests will come to the conclusion that California Indians were spiritually and biologically equal to them, but inferior socially and culturally. Meaning, the Spanish priests argued that California Indians had souls, and they could therefore be saved from damnation. And yes, they were actually human beings. However, culturally, they viewed California Indians as naive, childlike, close to savagery, and of course, deprived of the Holy Gospel. Thus, Spaniards took on an attitude of paternalism. They viewed California Indians as their children, and they as their parents. And obsessed with this, Spanish priests will force California Indians through a cultural transformation called Hispanization, or to Hispanicize, or to turn California Indians into Spaniards. On the surface level, this required California Indians to go from wearing their native dress to then European attire, from speaking their native tongue to then being fluent in Spanish. But the level of cultural transformation will be one much deeper, such as going from a hunter and gatherer society to then being forced onto permanent settlements and practicing agriculture. Their religious beliefs will be from animism to then converting to Christianity. Also very important to point out is that they will go from, in terms of their work ethic, from a subsistence living, producing just enough to feed your family, feed yourself, feed your community, to then being transformed into a work ethic that is focused on profit and accumulation. In terms of their relationship with the natural environment, they will go from living with nature in harmony with the animal kingdom to then dominating the land and viewing animals as simply beasts of burden. Over time, Spanish priests will create two distinct categories for Indians. The first will be considered neophytes, or those California Indians who were Hispanicized and Christianized. These were California Indians who were baptized, and they were considered, or it was considered that their soul was saved. They were loyal Spanish subjects. They were considered quote unquote gente de razón, or a person with reason, a person who could think for themselves. Gentiles, on the other hand, were not living on the missions. They were considered wild, meaning that they continued their own native traditions and customs. They continued to hunt and gather, practice their ceremonies, etc. And these were called or referred to as gente sin razón, or people without reason, still a child. The mission layout. The actual mission consisted of several buildings, principally a church and living quarters for the priests, a cemetery, a central workyard, and a farm. In addition, each mission had Indian dormitories where men and women were separate and locked up at night. Most missions were surrounded by an agricultural town or pueblo, where hundreds, if not thousands, of California Indians were concentrated. In addition, a presidio or fort accompanied each mission, usually several miles away, with the purpose of protecting the missions. Mission structure and characteristics. The mission structure and characteristics were semi-feudal. Feudal can roughly be described as a king, a knight, or nobleman providing protection for his serfs in exchange for labor. In the case of the missions, California Indians were required to contribute the labor of their bodies in return for the salvation of their souls. The missions became large land estates. They were self-sufficient, meaning all the necessities for living were made or grown at the missions. Over the years, the missions accumulated an enormous amount of wealth for the mission priests and the church. They had cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, grape vineyards, fruit orchards, vegetable gardens, etc. This enormous amount of wealth was generated with free labor, meaning the enslavement of California Indians. Priests were not successful in fully Hispanicizing California Indians. Only roughly about 50,000 out of 300,000 California Indians were actually baptized. But they were successful in retaining a free labor force. Men, or California Indian men, were engaged in the agricultural work, such as maintaining the gardens, the orchards, and vineyards. They also were responsible for the construction work, making the irrigation systems and dams. They tended to the large herds of cattle, leatherwork, carpentry, and any type of artwork around the missions and pueblos. The women were confined to housework, cooking, and cleaning, basically serving the priests every domestic need. And of course, they were responsible for the child rearing. Work days were hard and long. Indians were accustomed to working for subsistence, meaning they were on a seasonal clock and just enough for their subsistence. On the missions, they were now forced to labor for accumulation and surplus production, meaning that they worked